have the awkward pleasure of introducing myself. So I am Anya Prince. I'm an associate professor here at the University of Iowa College of Law. My teaching and research interests explore the ethical, legal, and social implications of genomic testing, with a particular focus in genetic discrimination and privacy rights, use of big data and algorithms, and insurance coverage of genetic technologies and interventions. Before coming here to Iowa, I was a postdoctoral research fellow at the UNC Center for Genomics and Society in the Department of Social Medicine at UNC Chapel Hill School of Medicine. And I'm going to be talking to you today about state regulation of direct-to-consumer genetic testing. Okay, so I'm sure you've all heard of direct-to-consumer genetic testing before. In 2017, it was a $117 million industry. And it has recently been projected to reach $4.2 billion by 2028. More than 26 million Americans people have participated in direct-to-consumer genetic testing, and this number continues to grow. One estimate is that about 20% of Americans have done DTC genetic testing to date. And you can see here that the main actors are Ancestry and 23andMe, or Ancestry DNA and 23andMe, but there's plenty of different companies out there. But these tests raise many concerns about who has access to the data, what their privacy policies are, whether or not different entities could gain access to this information and use it to discriminate. And generally, we don't have very much federal regulation of direct-to-consumer genetic testing. The Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, which you'll hear a lot about in the second half of our presentations today, they don't review non-medical or general wellness direct-to-consumer genetic testing like nutrigenomics or Ancestry or things like that. But even within the medical realm, the vast majority of DTC genetic tests have not received FDA review. And one of the major reasons for this is because many are laboratory developed tests, or LDTs, that are not reviewed by FDA because the FDA has exercised enforcement discretion. They say we could enforce these or could review these, but we've decided not to. The Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services and the Federal Trade Commission have some purview over regulating the clinical testing laboratories and the marketing of genetic tests. But really, most of the regulation for DTC testing is at the state level. And states have actually been quite active regulating genetic information. So now this is a slide that is not just about DTC testing only. It's just any state legislation from 2008 that's been introduced regarding genetic information. And you can see that a lot has been introduced. Much of it has died in the legislative process, meaning it was never passed. It didn't make it out of committee. It never got voted on, et cetera, et cetera. But the numbers are increasing over time. And if we look at the types of laws that are being introduced, the most recent increase, a lot of them have been privacy laws. In 2019, 2020, and 2021 specifically. And one of the reasons for this increase in privacy laws is that there's been a number of acts that have been introduced surrounding privacy and direct-to-consumer genetic testing specifically. So a number of states in 2021 and 2022 alone have introduced this type of legislation. And so of all of these states, all of them introduced pretty much copycat bills regulating DTC genetic testing companies, and 5 of these have already been signed into law in the last 2 years. So 10% of our states are all of a sudden really regulating in this space. So I want to talk just very briefly about what's in these laws. First, definitions matter. So one of the things that's really interesting about this is that the states define genetic data. Not all of the states do, but many of these bills define genetic data to include not just the raw sequence data, not just the genetic test findings, but also the health data that individuals give alongside of their genetic data. So if you have ever done 23andMe, they ask you a whole host of surveys about your what's called phenotypic data, or like the manifestations. And that also is counted as genetic data under these laws in many of the states. Okay, So they do 6 things, and I'm going to cover them briefly because I can't do a minute on each. Okay, so first, they require some sort of privacy policy statement prominently displayed and in lay language. They also require the consumer consent. There has to be initial express consent describing the use of genetic data, who have access to the genetic test results, or how the data can be shared. But it also requires additional consent for some other actions, such as retaining the sample, using data beyond the primary disclosed purposes, informed consent for research, or retention of the biospecimens and some of the marketing. There also has to be a valid legal process. A valid legal process is the term of the law. It has to be set up for giving genetic data to law enforcement. There is a caveat that this is without the consumer's express written consent. So they can consent around this and give data to law enforcement with consumer consent, but they do have to have a process for this. They also have to set up a strong security system to protect the genetic data. I grew up with these little stormtrooper things that were like in my bathroom as a child, like protecting, us. So felt like that was a good representation of needing to protect the data. There's also a series of consumer rights given under these laws. And those include the ability to access data, the ability to delete accounts and delete genetic data, but also the ability to destroy the underlying biospecimen. I should note here, de-identified information is not counted as genetic data under the law. So as long as you de-identify the data, it wouldn't necessarily have to be deleted, right? Or there's some question about how that might work. And then finally, many of these laws include that the DTC companies cannot disclose a consumer's genetic data to entities that offer health, life, long-term care insurances, or to any employers. And some states add disability insurers to that as well. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what the future for these laws are. There's clearly, they're very similar. So there's more work that I'm going to do to figure out who's introducing these bills, where they're being taken from, what the changes are across the state, but also how protective are they? Are they really doing that much more than the privacy policies these themselves were doing? And will we see more of these in the future, seeing that there's been a sort of increasing number of laws to date? So I'm going to continue to map this going forward. And so thanks to my research assistant, James Taylor, and we'll move on to the next